Welcome everyone. Just to introduce myself and Sinéad. My name is Niall. I'm a men's work facilitator here in Ireland and
Sinead, and I run a project called Conscious Connections, focused on bringing us into connection with ourselves and also others.
great. So we decided to do this. It's more of a conversation today, just so we get to talk around the topic of this, which is healing and shadow work in conscious relationships. So this is a very deep subject, and yeah, it's a multi-layered subject, and it's something that really interests us. And we will be introducing a ritual that we will be doing in September in Cork. So part of this is to speak about this subject a little bit more and give us an opportunity just to deep into this subject. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what I love is I feel like this is two topics that it's like almost the main topics that we're working with separately and is coming together because I'm doing so much conscious relating work and you're doing so much shadow work and they tie together so beautifully.
Yeah.
And just as you said that there, I really just had this moment from like, yeah, this is like the main thing that you're working with and the main thing that I'm working with, and it's like how they are together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how they support each other, because shadow work by itself is difficult, and if we're not like healing, moving through that and being in this greater resourced self, which is what I've learned through shadow work, because a lot of us, whenever we get into shadow, when we get into these deep parts of ourselves, it can be very easy to get stuck there, you know. And so we need to be like healing, moving through this and holding on to a greater vision of who we are as people. And as we spoke about before, conscious relating is inherently shadow work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you want to speak a little bit more about what that means to you?
Yeah. And I think it's like, especially to open with, that conscious relating is just so beautiful. Like, I really think this is how we heal our relationships going forward. It's the way for us that I see for us to have healthy relationships, and it's also really dark and icky and murky and challenging, and this is the shadowy aspect of ourselves, and it's really important to have the tools to navigate that, and like you said, like not get stuck in those depths and be able to come to this more celebratory place in how we relate. But I suppose in essence, like conscious relating, how it's different to a regular relationship, the type of relationship most of us have known until now. I mean, this is a really vast topic, but in a nutshell, it's bringing awareness and intentionality into how we relate and learning deeply about ourselves, including our own shadows, our own patterns, the things that are repeating, so that we can be in a container of a relationship and start to work then within this container for healing, for growth, for me, for you, for whoever's in this container. And this is, applicable to friendships and family relationships. But I think what we're talking about mostly today is in relation to our romantic dynamics.
Great. And I like what you're talking about there, that we create containers to work through this stuff. And and to really define what conscious relating is, consciousness comes from a state of awareness, so that we're not getting caught up in these dynamics. And this is what, especially a lot of the relationships that I went through earlier on in life, I was getting triggered, I was going into reaction, and I didn't have an awareness, I didn't have an objective place of being able to see the dynamics that were going on. So conscious relating then is being able to take a step back, start to look at the bigger picture, what's going on in the dynamic, and really hold that for the other person as well. So inherently, shadow work is part of it, and part of shadow work is we're working with the inner child. And just to define a little bit what shadow work is the parts of us that we have hidden, repressed, and denied. And it's a conditioning, it's a coping mechanism. And so we want to take shadow work away from this idea that it's a negative part of us. Shadow, the parts that we hid and denied, we were trying to protect. So there was a real necessity for us to have this conditioning, these ways of their coping mechanisms in the world. And as we reach adulthood, that we start to create enough resource in ourselves to be able to start bringing these things out. And this is the conscious relating part, that we bring these pieces out of the shadow, and that we can work with them in the relational field. So we create enough capacity to be bigger than the stories themselves. We create enough capacity to be able to see when our inner child is active, recognizing that it's conditioning. And then we create the capacity to be able to be slightly more objective for each other as well, and say, I feel like this could be your inner child, or this is my inner child. That we're not getting so personally caught up in these stories, and start to recognize that relationships is the way that, as we talked about, this is our way of healing. If we can do this well, that working with the shadow, using the container as a way of learning about ourselves and each other, and that ultimately the container is a way, because the shadow, the nature of the shadow is that it's always wanting to be seen, it's always wanting to be healed. So shadow is part of this, and it's also the route to healing. We have to go through the shadow to find those pieces that we put into shadow as a coping mechanism.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to acknowledge as well, like when we talk about this, we'll just say the type of relationship that we would both have experienced in the past, and I think most people will have experienced in the past, and most people who are drawn to our work are looking for something new. They're ready for something deeper and something new for the future of their relationship with themselves and with those on the outside. And it's not that when we're in conscious relationship those triggers don't appear. They absolutely do. Like you said, that shadow wants to be seen. That inner child is crying out for whatever it deeply is seeking since we were children. And it's not that stuff isn't happening in conscious relationship, it's that we recognize that it's happening in conscious relationship. And when we are within the container of a relationship where we feel safe enough to be seen in our vulnerability, and also to be called out, because that's what we're doing, we're calling one another out, and it brings in this real soulful part of a dynamic. It's almost like this soul contract then, we're in this container together, we're calling each other out, like you mentioned, is this potentially some inner child stuff coming up for you, like, oh, this is painful when somebody will call us out in that way. But when there's that safety and that capacity has been built, and there's that softness, the word that was really coming to me when you were speaking, it was really about bringing softness to the whole thing, then we can start to explore all that stuff, and with another. We don't have to do all this work by ourselves. It is fundamentally our work to do, but we can do it being supported by another person.
Absolutely. And I think that's, for me, the idea of calling each other out is that we're really supporting each other, because fundamentally, on some level, whether we want to work through this stuff or not, the greater understanding of life is that life is inherently trying to come back to wholeness, and that involves shadow. So yes, maybe we're calling each other out, but I would even phrase it in another way. We're supporting each other to be more of ourselves. And it may be difficult to be invited to look at pieces of our shadow that we don't want to see, because the reason that shadow is so difficult to look at is because we created all these defense systems as a way of not being able to feel that. But actually then, if we do support each other to be able to look at our shadow, that's when we come into more wholeness. And just another aspect, when you were speaking, just a teacher that I've worked with, Robert Masters, and he talks about the idea that we don't fuse with our emotions. So that when the inner child is active, when we recognize it in another, when we suggest or ask or become curious, could this possibly be your inner child? That we really support each other to not fuse with the inner child. And I'd love to go into some more personal examples in a minute for both of us. But I know I've been in situations, for instance, where it's my inner child battling another person's inner child, and we're having this big row, whatever that looks like, and it takes one person to step back, conscious relating, stepping out of the dynamic, stepping more into the adult, stepping it more into a resourced place, and saying, I think this is what's happening here. And it's hard because it's almost addicted. The inner child is like, why, why, why can't you look after me? Why can't you take care of me? Why are you triggering these things within? And so it takes, it's also deep, this is the difficulty of shadow work in a way, is that it takes deep resource to step out of these dynamics.
It's just easier to do what we've always done.
Exactly.
And these patterns, like
Exactly.
you said, they're not called inner child patterns for no reason. They're coming since childhood. We have been doing this stuff our whole lives on repeat.
Yes.
Yeah. Trying to probably initially get love from our parents or protect ourselves from hurt or whatever, the root cause was. But it's been our whole lives then that we're doing this. So it's how we're wired, it's coming back to the nervous system as well, and I think also it's like not everything needs to be dealt with in the moment.
Sure.
Just having the awareness to say, I'm super activated right now and I need to step out. I need time. Let's come back to this in an hour, tomorrow, next week. Whatever it is, you don't even need to give that time, but just the recognition of, I'm super activated right now.
Yeah.
This is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
This is just, it's like, are we feeding the fire?
Yeah.
Or are we doing some productive healing work? Like what's actually happening? Because if we just continue throwing sticks on the fire and we're super activated and we're in this dynamic, at any moment there we can just choose that awareness piece. Hold on, I know myself. I know what's happening. I can see what's going on here. And like you said, it only takes one person to say like, something else needs to happen here. And depending, on the capacity, but usually a bit of cool off period is good. Come into regulation and then be able to broach those tender topics again.
Absolutely. And what comes to me in you speaking about that is like, that's the importance. I think we spoke about this earlier on as well, is like that connection to self first. If we're feeling resourced in ourselves, it's like, I'm sure people will recognize this, when we're feeling tired, cranky, under-resourced in ourselves, anything is going to get to us. But if we're really cultivating that sense of connection to self, that sense of connection to something deeper within us, in those moments, then that becomes the ground of us being able to step out of these dynamics. And so I was just speaking to that sense of personal practice, knowing ourselves, knowing our dynamics, recognizing our dynamics, and slightly depersonalizing from the situation. These are just my wounds. This is just my coping mechanism. And it was needed because in terms of our body, it's like, for some of us, if we were in like a violent home, we needed to protect parts of ourselves from annihilation. If these shadow parts didn't come online to protect us, we would have been annihilated. And in the men's work that I've done as well, we talk about this idea. Sometimes it's helpful to have this idea of the safety officer.
Okay.
And so the safety officer comes online whenever we are under threat. So at some point in our lives, then we recognize when the safety officer is coming up. We speak to the safety officer and we say, okay, I understand. I know that you were here to protect me before because we were in danger, but we're not in danger anymore. And even to kind of put a name on it a little bit, just, my safety officer is active, my inner child is freaking out. And then we can take more of that adult perspective because we know what's going on. We take ourselves out of the situation a little bit more. And then we have more tools, we're resourced, we have tools, we have awareness, we recognize these characters that are playing out. I think internal family system, I don't know if you've done any of that, but a great way of like working with these internal dynamics that are happening.
Yeah, and this is work that people can do alone.
Yeah.
It's necessary to do this work alone as foundation for healthy union then coming forward. For sure you can come into a relationship not knowing about any of this stuff and then begin to learn and begin to do this work, but it's always going to be solo work. The container of the relationship is supporting that, but you're still going to need to be able to know yourself deeply and have those resources within yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a self-practice piece. I mean, when the self-practice piece comes back to relationship, and also to say like, for me, conscious relating also applies to friendships, especially applies to family dynamics.
The
Like,
hardest. The
I've just come
hardest.
out of 3 days with my father, and that's, romantic relationships I think are one very difficult place because ultimately we as our inner child are looking for that connection, that that's our deepest longing in some ways. So all those blocks or all those fears or all those trust issues are going to come up then as we go back into that sense of connection. But those similar dynamics then are also playing out with our parents, with our family, and as you say, they're habitual coping mechanisms. And the difference in this situation is that maybe our parents or our family haven't changed. And the growth point here is like if we have done enough healing that we're able to actually be with our family and not get triggered, have conversations with our mom or our dad, and to be able to keep that recognition of how is my inner child now. So it's all practice. And for me, like going back to my mom, because most of my wounds, we'll go into this in just a moment, most of my wounds are around my mom. So when I'm having a conversation with my mom, it's like, how is my inner child? What is the reaction that's going on here? And also recognizing, I think that, triggers and reactions, what it comes up in the container, emotions are messengers. And it's not that we're trying to get away from reactions, we're not trying to get away from triggers, that's informing us. If I'm triggered, there's something going on in me, there's some part of my defense system, some part of my inner child that's in a reactive state. So it becomes a pathway to healing. And doing it in relationship becomes even more powerful. But that's the difficult part, because whenever I reveal something vulnerable in myself or intimate in myself that I may have done in my parental dynamic that wasn't received, it was put down, don't talk like that, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to speak about that. So we also have a defense mechanism then whenever we're in, even if we're attempting to be consciously relating, that vulnerable part is going to come up.
For sure.
Can I share?
Of rejection,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
fear of losing love.
Exactly.
If I reveal this darker aspect of myself, will you still love me?
Sure.
Am I still worthy of receiving love?
Yeah.
Even when I embrace these shadow aspects of myself.
Yeah. And that's not even rational, but for the inner child, it's real. If the inner child doesn't get love, then they're obliterated.
It dies. Yeah.
It dies. And so we start to contextualize, and we're like, oh, no wonder I have these defense mechanisms, because that was the consequence.
Yeah.
So we take a bigger picture and say, okay, I feel reaction, but I understand. So we create more space around these things. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. A has been building resource, self-practice, and connected to my adult. I'm connected to my father. A lot of the stuff that I work with men is like, where's your inner father? Because you didn't have a father when you were younger. Your father wasn't there. If he was there, he wasn't present. If he was there, he may have been angry. But he wasn't there in the way that you needed him, which was support, guidance. Unconditional, exactly. So we can't have an expectation that our father is going to do that. And I know I lived with this for years, hoping that my mom would like really see me for who I am and the work that I do. Like I'd love my mom to turn around and say, Niall, the work you're doing with men is incredible.
It's so funny because that's what I want from my father.
Yeah. And what does that look like from your father?
Oh, it's looking for that recognition,
Yeah.
So I have like 2 bodies of work that I'm doing. My other shamanic work, my father does not understand or agree with or resonate at all.
Yeah.
So he is in, shutdown. He doesn't want to know about it.
Yeah.
The easiest way for him to kind of live with the work that I'm doing is to not talk about it and pretend it doesn't exist.
Mine too.
And then, with this connection piece, there's just a real lack of recognition, I feel, of the depth of the work that I'm doing. And sometimes I feel like I'm trying to prove to him, the effect that we're having on the world through the events that we're doing and the people whose lives we're touching. And I'm like, hang on, I don't need to convince my dad that I'm doing beautiful work in the world. You know,
But what is that part of you that wants to convince him?
it's the little girl.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know, it's the little girl that
Exactly.
wants my daddy to tell me,
Exactly.
you're doing a great
You're a
job.
good girl.
Yeah.
You know, so when we really, again, taking that bigger perspective and go, oh, my little girl just wants this from my father.
Yeah.
And then we can start to be with her, you know, our internal father. The same with me. It's like I'd love my mum to be able to just recognize what I do, but I wasn't mothered in a way that I needed when I was younger. And actually, I don't know if you can relate to this, but unconsciously, the inner child, if I'm not aware of what he's doing, he will share things with my mum, hoping to get that recognition from her.
Totally.
And if I don't get it, then he starts spinning out again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, you
The
did this thing, I
wound.
told you.
Yeah. Completely.
So this is why we have to be really cultivating this connection, especially around our parents and with our partners, you know, that the inner child, this is the terrain of the inner child. If we deny, and I did deny for years that I had an inner child in relationship, you know, like, how's your inner child? It's like, he's fine.
It's grand, we're having
It's
a laugh,
grand,
aren't we?
So like when we really, you know, and this is the adulting piece, to be like, I have an inner child, he's freaking out at the moment, this is how he is.
He wants to love and recognition.
He wants to love and recognition. Yeah.
Job, please,
Exactly. You know, and I think we talked about this just before starting the recording here, of like, when we really, within a conscious partnership, whether we use that term or not, when we come into that relationship, knowing our dynamics, knowing the other's dynamics, and that these dynamics will repeatedly play out because they're trying to be healed, and that we tend to each other's wounds. That I know if I was in partnership with you, that I would know your deepest wounds, and instead of continuously triggering that I'm tending to, it's like, oh, this is your wounds, and you may be in your inner child now, but just to support you, you know, like, I recognize this wound, and I'm not going to prod that anymore.
Yeah.
I heard this beautiful thing recently, it was on Instagram, and she was saying her husband actually, he had a particular wound about his siblings taking stuff off his plate.
Okay. Yeah.
So she would never do that to him, because she would never want to trigger him in that way.
Yeah.
And so we
that's love, like, that's devotion.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
That's just showing up in this container, like, I have so much love and reverence for you. I don't want to trigger you.
Yeah. And that's hard, because whenever somebody else's inner child is triggered, then that triggers our inner child, and then we get into this dynamic. So, and I think we need, you know, as we move from unconscious relating, if you like, into conscious relating, that's where I think a lot of us are at the moment of developing a really strong personal practice that becomes the foundation of this.
Not conscious or not conscious.
Yeah, exactly. So will we share a little bit about it, because I'd love to know your parents' relational dynamics, and what's the one that's kind of come through in how you show up then in your partnership. So what's what's the wound, if you like, maybe a few of them I can share one.
So emotional unavailability is a big one for me. From both my parents, but predominantly my father. I mean, there's multiple things, right? I'm just picking one that I really feel is prominent.
What was their relational dynamic like? How were they?
Their relational dynamic was, at like a scope and a bit of perspective, it looked pretty good. Like, there was a lot of definitely very healthy aspects, and even after they had separated, co-parenting. But they did separate when I was 12, and then got back together, and then separated again.
Okay.
And that's a pattern that I can see repeating in my life. At this end of relationship, it's not sure, it's not certain, and even there can be a lot of in and out.
Right.
Am I committed? Am I not? Right. Is this the right thing for me? Is it not? Those questions, I think, would have been very prominent for my parents early on, and then towards the end of the relationship. So those are things that arise for me. This uncertainty: is this right for me? Is it not? When I'm ending the relationship, ending it, going back in, ending it, going back in. Like, that's definitely a pattern that I've inherited. And then emotional availability, like with my mother, I think that shows up a lot in how I relate to my child. I think a lot of mothers and maybe parents can relate to how, when I have become a mother, I was like, oh my god, I'm becoming my mother.
Okay, yeah.
So it's really to grow that capacity to be present for my son through discomfort and not reactive in the way my own mother would have been.
Yeah.
And then, so that's a little bit around the emotional unavailability. My dad he has done some incredible emotional work in his life. He struggles to hold space for my big emotions still to this day.
Yeah.
And
what happens? He goes into shutdown, or he doesn't want to hear?
Total checkout.
Right, okay.
You know,
yeah.
Total checkout. I saw this a few months ago. I arrived at his home with my stepmother, and I was very upset. So upset. The most upset I've been for a really long time. And that little girl was so activated. I just needed my dad to give me a hug and to hold me and to tell me everything was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I was so stuck. I was unable to ask for that. And I could see he just was not able to cope with it at all, you know.
And do you think if you were able to ask for it, do you think you'd be able to give it to you or not?
I don't know.
Yeah. It's a big risk then as well for your inner child. It's a big risk. And so in a situation like that, how do you resource yourself? What did you do then whenever he wasn't available but your inner child was active?
Yeah, I recognised this.
Yeah.
Like, it was that recognition of like, okay, this is the little girl in me now, and I'm so looking for this comfort and something that he cannot give. Like, he cannot give this thing, and I'm also going to take responsibility because I am so stuck right now in being unable to ask for this. I'm really just working to regulate then, to come back into the body, to slow down the breath, just to be with what I'm feeling. But it's this resource for me. It's a lot about just grounding and being in my body and coming like out of my head. And what actually happened then is that my stepmother came home and she just looked at me, and I asked her for a hug, and she just held me. You know, she held me and she really brushed me off. You know, she's incredible. She has incredible capacity. You know, and she really stepped in and co-regulated then with me, you know. It was really quite beautiful.
And that's really, you know, it's really beautiful. I think the key piece around that for me is like you knowing what you needed and then asking for that. And I know from men and from myself as well, it's like being able to recognize what I need, because for a lot of us, we've denied our emotions. We've denied that we have any sense of need at all. I'm fine. All right.
The average Irish man reaction.
Yeah.
Nothing's going on. Everything's grand.
Yeah. So it's grand, you know, and it's grand as like, I'm getting through this moment, you know, and I think that this, you know, when we talk about collective shadow, like that's just such a, you know, in the collective shadow of Ireland, I see in men, I see that in myself as well. Like even this morning, there was a part of me nervous about coming here, you know, and then even in that moment, I was like, I wouldn't tell you. And so this is the shadow that comes up, the self-protective piece. I can't tell you because for me, or as men, if we showed any weakness in the playground, then we get attacked. Yeah. So the fact that you're able to identify your need and then ask, and the next step is asking, can I have a hug? Like for me to turn around to a guy, like I really respect a lot of the guys that I work with that do have this, because it's still a bit of a kind of a stretch point for me. Like, I need a hug. Is like so cutting edge.
And it's so mad that it is such an edge.
Sure.
Because it's so normal that we would co-regulate in this way.
Sure.
You know, and I feel that this is a big severance that's happened for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we have so many walls around our heart that it's difficult. There's a protection. Oh, I can't actually even ask for this for fear of it not being delivered.
Yeah, well, and that's multi-layered as well. We've been taught to be independent. We've been taught that to ask for something is weak.
Yeah.
Um, and
A fear of rejection.
A fear of rejection, yeah.
And it's like in that situation in my family home, it's like I really doubted my father's capacity to actually because there's one thing to give a hug, right? There's another to really be present with someone and hold for them.
Yeah.
And I could see that he didn't have capacity for that.
Sure.
Whereas my stepmother, as I said, has so much capacity, and very open-heartedly was able to step into that space and provide
Beautiful.
that.
And also recognizing that there, we may talk a little bit about this later, about the difference between the masculine and the feminine. So like the masculine, the father, he will provide a certain level of care, reassurance and safety from the masculine. And that the feminine, your stepmother, that she has a particular flavor as well. So we may have a good relationship. The nurturing, exactly. So the nurturing and the safety. So it's recognizing that we may have a good relationship with one parent. And so that part of us, because as you said, it's like we take on then these templates of the masculine and the feminine from our parents. So we take on the template of the masculine from our father, we take on the template of the feminine from the mother, and we also take on the relational dynamic, as you said, which was, the not being sure whether you're going to be in or out. So again, then I'm just coming back to this idea of we take a greater perspective. It's not your fault. Yeah. You were brought up in an environment. We are beings of osmosis, if you like. We were shaped by our parents, but it's our responsibility and our job to be more objective about it now. It's like, okay, this is something I took from my mom, and I just the more that we can hold more of this sense of like, oh, this is just nonsense, on some, a bit of a cosmic joke.
It's like, this doesn't serve me.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I'd love to bring in another piece around, my father and how this appears.
Yeah.
So, 100%, my type would be emotionally unavailable.
Great.
And I have to really look at this and say, when I feel an attraction towards somebody, or there's a connection, or there's something happening, I'm like, are you my type? And is this healthy? Are you emotionally available? Can you meet me where I so desire and need to be met, where I'm at right now and how I want to relate? Does this person, random person, but have the capacity to meet me there emotionally?
Yeah.
And the majority of the time, my kind of initial attractions will always be towards somebody emotionally unavailable.
Yeah.
Because I'm repeating that. That's what I've learned. I've spent my whole life seeking for that love and approval from my father.
Yeah.
So when I'm going into my romantic dynamics, I'm seeking for that love and approval.
Exactly.
And I then have in the past found myself in relationship with people who did not have that capacity to self-reflect, that capacity to hold for me, that those things just didn't exist. And stepping into this whole field of conscious relating, it's like a choice to say, like, I'm not going to do this anymore because I'm devoted to myself and this doesn't serve me.
Yeah, and that's the consciousness piece. As you say, we will keep repeating these patterns, and the reason we keep repeating the patterns and being attracted to the same people is because the shadow is trying to heal itself. So we repeat, and I think it's really important. I had to do this many, many times, looking at the repeated patterns in my relationship and taking that very difficult step of doing exactly what you're saying, of going like, no, I'm not going to, even though like my body is just like, oh, I want this person, or I want to be with it. I'm recognizing this is my learned, conditioned attraction to this person from a wounded place. And so when we really recognize that and start like consciously, which is hard, like these are neural pathways in the brain that are set up. Our nervous system is set up Because actually, this is a really good point. Our nervous systems are so used to whatever our relational dynamic is with our parents that our nervous system will find that more comfortable, that which is used to, rather than something that's healthy.
Yeah.
So something that feels good to us initially may not actually be healthy. It's just that that's what our nervous system is used to. And if we have two parents that are emotionally unavailable, then as you say, you will look for that because your nervous system is wired for that.
Yeah.
And this is why it's so difficult then to break out of these patterns, because everything feels in our body that we want the thing that we had before, because everything is set up that way. All our chemicals, our neural pathways, our nervous system. So to do this work is difficult as well.
Totally.
And just to recognize the wholeness. Rewiring ourselves.
Totally rewiring. And I think, a little note here, like, especially as I have such a deep interest in intentionally dating.
Yeah.
And part of like this is most people who are like experts in the field now will say, when you meet somebody and it's like fireworks.
Yeah.
Fucking run. Leave. Forget about it. They are not the person for you.
Sure.
Because it's all of this. Everything
exactly.
we just talked about. That's happening. When you meet somebody and it's like, it's a different feeling. It's calm. It feels almost maybe boring.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this is maybe something to explore then,
Yeah, and I think that we're just living a very quick society. What I've really learned, the last person that I was with, it took me about probably 8 months to a year to fall in love with her. But we jump into relationships because our inner child is like, oh, this is the thing that I wanted.
Love me.
You love me. Let's be in this. Let's like create this happy family. That a lot of us have this unconscious thing. So recognizing that it's a slow process actually to fall in love with someone. And as you say, the initial attraction, sexual attraction, is most likely an unhealthy dynamic. Slow the fuck down.
Yes.
Date and date and date. Stop having sex so soon.
Yeah.
And, that's what I really learned in the last relationship. Like, I don't need to force falling in love with someone because it happens when it's ready. But that was the reframe for me. I was like, so the people who I haven't fallen in love with is because I may not fall in love with them. But if I stay long enough, I'll know whether this person I truly want to commit to and I really want to be with or not.
Yeah.
But when we bypass all that, go from our inner child perspective or from our cultural ideas of partnership. The conditioning. Yeah, you need to find a partner. You need to have kids.
It looks like this Hallmark movie where they've just, gotten married and fallen in love in like 5 minutes.
Like the
she
Notebook.
She had a baby. It took 30 seconds.
Yeah. Like the Notebook, and I think that's a really prime example of that. Like heart wrenching, like love and missing, and and like it's really beautiful and evocative. And we also keep bigger perspective again, like what's really going on in these feelings. So that, and this is what I love about Robert Masters' work. It's about having perspective, and it's not about having some rational or logical way that we consider our relationships. It's having a deeper perspective and not just running with our emotions fully in the moment, just taking a step back.
And that is like, it's so potent because I can still find myself, I'm emotional and I'm ungrounded, and then I'm reactive, and that happened to me recently, and I was like, hold on, now, what's going on? How is my overall state? Unfucking grounded was the answer. This is not the moment to be running on emotions. This is the moment to ground. What are my tools now for grounding? What do I need to do? Spend a few days working on that. Have a few sleeps, and then let's see what's happening with the emotional state.
Beautiful.
And what action needs to be taken. But it's not this reaction, this running, this going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So does it, just because I'd like to also transition, because this is obviously talked about healing and the shadow work. We talked a lot about shadow, but I want to kind of name a real piece in here around shadow, because we will be talking about this at the end, just a little bit about this event. And the thing is, for me, men and women have been split. Let's just go into a bigger picture here. There's a strategy of splitting men and women, of making women subservient. This is maybe not so much these days. making men the breadwinners, women subservient, being in the house. And women have become resentful of that, so they've stepped more into their masculine, more into like, I want to earn my own money, I don't want to be reliant on my partner. And then men have felt threatened by that, because it's like, well, who am I now if I'm not the breadwinner?
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, even a deeper wound than that is the way that women were repressed, subjugated, the witch hunts. You know, women were made second-class citizens. We still see it in the world today. If you want to think about the burqas or whatever, you know, like the way women are veiled because men don't have enough self-discipline to not look at a woman. So there's a resentment from women against men. This is more of collective wounds here. There's a resentment of that women were suppressed by the patriarchy, by colonialism, by men in power, by the church.
Yeah.
And what we talked about a little bit earlier, there's a reaction happening. And what I see in the dynamic in Ireland is a real undermining of men, not only in Ireland. You can speak about this as because you spoke about it a little bit earlier as well, but that there's a labeling of toxic masculinity. And I know in my experience, a lot of the men that I'm dealing with, it's like anytime I try to stand up or make a stand or whatever, I'm shut down.
People are trying to find their way.
Yeah.
You know, we're trying to find how to come into healthy balance.
Yeah.
Who are we and how do we express that?
Yeah.
In a way that is healthy, in a way that isn't misunderstood by the opposite sex.
Sure.
In a way that brings us into union instead of widening this gap.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, women are powerful. We are so powerful.
Yeah.
We are an expression of the universe.
Yeah.
You know, connected above and below.
Yep.
We birth, we recreate life. It's phenomenal. And, you know, we were, before all of this, in many, many cultures, deeply revered. There was the goddess, you know, the women who were leading, or the people who were leading ritual were often women. But, and men, the masculine, held this reverence for the woman, for the feminine, because we were this expression of the divine. And then, you know, it's a big topic, but through fear and, you know, we have been subjugated and put down and had those, you know.
And there's the we as in women, but there's the feminine.
Yes.
And the feminine being like our nature, our power, our connection to land, our connection to wisdom, indigenous teachings, the medicine. And so that was put down because colonial powers wanted to rule us. The Catholic Church wanted to rule us, so the feminine needed to be eradicated so that we became subject to their power.
Yeah. I mean, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Yeah, exactly.
That is who the feminine has been replaced by.
Sure.
A Holy Ghost.
Sure.
And that is, imagine the implication of that.
Yeah.
Just on a subconscious level. That we are just a ghost.
Yeah.
We are no longer this expression of the divine.
Yeah.
This connection to the creative force of the universe.
Yeah.
We're just a ghost.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, there's deep resentment in the field. And you know, I've had difficulties in my relationships over the years. I've also had my own shadows around this of like my unconscious learned dismissal of women, feeling that like in my first relationship I completely controlled the woman that I was with, feeling that that I should be in control in the household. So all these like really deep unconscious patterns come up in relationship, you know, that I learned from my parents dynamics. And just recognizing that these are, you know, they're multi-layered, you know, like it all comes from this kind of deeper pit of split between the masculine and the feminine, and how it kind of filters through into like specifics. But ultimately it all comes from this split, from these two parts of self. So maybe just to say around this, so this is ultimately this container that we're doing, We do a little bit of promotion.
Sure.
The container that we're doing in September in Cork, on the 21st of September, it's a half-day event from 2 till 6.
Yeah.
Information is in your bio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all on the website.
It's all on the website. Great.
Link in bio.
And just to go into that briefly, I did a lot of work with this, and I know you've done work around this as well, that the split between the masculine and the feminine, the split between men and women, and just recognizing that it's such a deep, deep healing wound. And what I see in culture happening at the moment is that men are doing a lot of work together, women are doing a lot of work together,
Yes.
and there's a need now for both of us to come together. There's actually a lot of resentment from both sides against each other.
And it's this piece around safety, because it's easy for women to gather in circle
Sure.
and share our wounds and do healing work together.
Yeah.
And we tap into deeper layers of ourselves.
Yeah.
But like you said, now the moment is to come together. And it's not one or the other.
Yes.
It's that we do that work and then we bring it together, and we can meet in container where we feel safe enough to really name what our experience is, and to be able to hear that from the other and begin to heal that in group ceremony together.
In the village.
Yes.
Because this is collective work. And actually you and I trying to work out, and this is the difficulty, like relationships used to be conducted within the village. In the tribes of Burkina Faso, when one couple in the village had a difficulty in the relationship, they were called into the center. There was a circle of ashes put around them, and the whole village watched as they expressed what was happening, because they realized, because they were interdependent culture, so that if one relationship was off, it affected the entire community. And we've lost our connection to community, so we isolate, and we become ashamed of the relational dynamics. We fight against each other. We don't share what's going on in our, we see all this, this is why we have these charities and so on that people can ring up, because we don't share what's going on in our relational dynamic. But it was never like this, because it was understanding that the individual relationships had an impact on the whole community. So, I was with somebody a few years ago, and that was her thing, is like, how do we bring our relational dynamics to the community as medicine?
Beautiful.
So we do it in the collective village, and that's why we're coming together to be able to honor that these two parts. So there will be equal men, equal women, and we'll have an opportunity to, as we've talked about within this discussion, to create more resource and be able to speak from that deep split.
And take responsibility as well, because we've spoken a little bit, around the wounding that women feel. And, you spoke to toxic masculinity, but there's also this whole trend of emasculation of men that's happening. And it's not just that we women are wounded and feel wounded by the masculine and by what we've experienced. It's also that we need to take some responsibility and be able to hear what the experience of the masculine has been, and together really hold for that.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to name that, both men and women have been fucked by this system. Both have been fucked. And I understand for women or for the feminine that there's been a reaction like, fuck you, we're not going to be treated in this way again. And now, as you say, women need to take responsibility and go well, actually, the impact of our rage is also impacting them, but they were also affected. Men were really affected by this, because we lost our connection to our emotions. We lost our connection to our own sense of embodiment. And that's how we ended up being addicted to alcohol, drugs. That's how we end up isolating. That's how we end up unable to connect with our partners. Do you know? How are you feeling? I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Grand.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
So we were really fucked by this as well. But I really want to say that it's important to recognize that you as women, as a representative of the feminine, we're both representative of the feminine, were fucked worse. But we were fucked too. And I just experienced some in the past, a lot of blame on men. I experience this in the men that I work with as well. We get blamed for a lot of stuff. You know, men have it good. You know, the whole society is set up for men. You know, but we're struggling.
Yeah, exactly. And the statistics, you know, we've talked about this briefly, I think, when we've
Yeah.
spoken before, but, you know, they're not in the favour for men because
Yeah.
men talk about what's happening for them a lot less than women.
Yeah.
We
But we've been
have more
trained that way.
tendency
Do
to-
not talk about your emotions.
Exactly. Don't appear vulnerable. And
Don't
this is
appear
what-
vulnerable.
You know, it just comes to me again and again in all the work that I'm doing. It's just this softness.
Yeah.
Can we peel back these layers, these walls we've built around ourselves, around our heart, and appear in vulnerability?
Yeah.
In front of our sister, our mother, our friend, our partner, the men in our lives, whatever it is. You know, let's reveal ourselves.
Absolutely. And you know, that's part of the difficulty, you know, in conscious partnership is to be able to, as you say, reveal those vulnerable parts.
It's huge. It's so
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yes.
Terrifying. And it comes back to where we started.
Yeah.
You know, this vulnerable inner child who's afraid of rejection, afraid of losing love, afraid of being ousted from the pack. You know, all those things. It's so deep.
And also just another piece that's come into me here is like, as men, we need you. Do you know, we need you to help us with our healing, you know, and the container I'm doing towards the end of the year, I'm working with a woman to support men. And we always worked together in the past. So yes, it's been important for women to go do the work, find what is the feminine? How does she express herself? What is my sexuality? How can I like reveal that even to my sisters? And for men to start owning our shadows and start, you know, finding our balls again, you know, in our own groups, you know, so that we're not, because men and women get very influenced by each other. So once we do a little bit of work, but, you know, men need women to support us as well, you know. And that's what the healing piece around this is, you know. I was on a webinar on Monday night and I was like, what do you guys need to hear from women? I trust you. You're safe. I respect you. You know, and we can say these to each other, but when we hear this from the feminine, from a woman, like I did an initiation with 25 women, there was 19 men initiated through the feminine. And there was a particular exercise we did on the Saturday evening where the women dressed in white, and we were sitting in a row, 19 men, dressed in white, and they danced for us. They danced for us, and we just stood in awe. And after the dance, they came and they removed our shoes and they bathed our feet as a sign of reverence to the masculine. But the power of that, like that touched me so deeply because I'd never been revered for being a man. I'd never been recognized as even a good thing because my mum shamed my masculinity from a very young age. So this is the power of this work, that we can catalyze our healing. Yes, we can do it. I can do it with men. We can bring in the feminine. We can do all that. But when we come together, because this is the main healing, the split between the left, feminine, the right side of the body, above, below, man, women. So, you know, this, and so when we come together to tend to those wounds, it's so powerful and actually so beautiful.
And it's the power also of ritual and ceremony.
Yes.
And this is what we've really tapped into in the creation of this. It's creating the ceremony.
Yes.
It is a ceremony, and within that they're creating the ritual. It's something much more profound. And everything that you share there, that men want to hear from women.
Yeah. What do you want to hear from men?
Oh my, well, I just want to feel all those things.
Yeah.
You know, It's exactly those things.
Right.
You know, I want to feel really fucking safe.
But that's the difference. Like I didn't say safe, but for a feminine, it's safety. Yeah. You want to be seen. You want to be heard. Yeah. So it's recognizing that there are different needs within both men and women. And when we really step into those templates, then we can really cause major healing with each other. And just to kind of give a little bit of description for anyone who is interested in this, we will be doing, it's equal gender. Yeah. We will be doing, myself will be running a group of men, and we will be doing exercises to build up this masculine energy. And you will be running the group then with women. And then we will come together in a ceremony, in a ritual, to be able to look at these wounds, to recognize the wounds, and also just to come into what we've just spoken about there, is just like recognizing the beauty. What I love about women is what you love about men is, and recognizing the beauty, because this is the sacred. When we heal this split, we come into this sacred union that becomes more powerful than we can even imagine. And this is why this split is trying to heal now, because we're needing to catalyze into something greater, because we're needing to heal, because our earth is dying, because our relationships are dying. There is so much that is dying, and this for me is the key, because we become powerful when we come back together again as men and women. We can change the world.
And it's transformative.
Yeah.
It's not just, a practice that isn't going to impact. The idea of this is that it's impacting our own inner dynamic of the masculine, feminine.
Very good.
And then the
Very
dynamic that we're having outside.
Beautiful.
Also.
Great. Well, I think that's a really good piece to end with. Ultimately, whatever is outside is internal. And that's been my greatest journey. Ultimately recognizing that all my relationships, my relationship with my mom, my relationship with the feminine, is a mirror of my internal relationship with the feminine. And ultimately that's where the deep healing needs to happen. And once I come into right relationship with my own inner feminine, that's when we become whole. And recognizing for you, similar with the masculine. And that ultimately we're just doing our own internal healing, and that everyone in the world is facilitating that in us, if we are willing to do that work of looking at our shadow and not blame the world, blame relationship for what's going on.
Yeah, and we're just holding space for each other.
Yeah.
In this community way.
Sure.
In this gathering.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. It was such a beautiful conversation, and we went really deep. And so, thank you so much for this time. And I'm really honored to be doing this work with you as well, knowing what you're bringing through with conscious relating, and just what I'm bringing through with shadow, that is very, men and women coming together, potent mix of different skills.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.